Number 10. The Shaolin Temple was never meant to be a martial arts school. It became one by accident. Most people picture Shaolin monks kicking through wooden dummies or launching through midair like they redefine physics. But the original Shaolin Temple wasn't supposed to train fighters at all. It was built in the 5th century as a quiet Buddhist sanctuary, a place for meditation, scripture copying, and strict spiritual discipline. Essentially, it was supposed to be the ancient equivalent of a peaceful retreat center, not an action movie dojo. So, how did it evolve into the birthplace of Kung Fu? Ironically, it started with survival, not philosophy. The temple sat in the mountains of Hunan, where bandits were common, local politics were unstable, and nearby warlords often solved problems with swords instead of negotiations. Monks had to defend themselves, and since they were not nobles or soldiers, they had no formal training. What they did have was time, discipline, and a deep understanding of how the human mind and body work, so they began experimenting, combining breathing techniques, animal-based observation, Indian warrior exercises introduced by ancient monks, and Buddhist principles of balance and flow. What started as small self-defense routines snowballed into an entirely new system of movement, and then came the moment that cemented Shaolin's reputation, when a group of monks famously intervened in a political rebellion, not with negotiations, but with fists, staves, and a level of coordination that shocked onlookers. From that day forward, the Shaolin Temple wasn't just a monastery. It became the incubator of one of the world's most sophisticated martial traditions. Americans often imagine martial arts as a sport or hobby, like signing up for karate after school. But for Shaolin monks, every move had one purpose: staying alive in a world where defense wasn't optional. #9. Shaolin monks didn't train to fight better. They trained to fight without fear, and that changed everything. Here is something most people don't realize. Shaolin Kung Fu wasn't built around fancy kicks or cinematic flips. It was built around mind training, psychological conditioning so powerful that warriors, generals, and emperors came to study it. Shaolin monks believed that fear, not skill, is what loses battles. You can be strong, fast, or technically perfect, but fear will slow your reaction time, cloud your judgment, and collapse your stamina long before any punch lands. So, the monks designed training that targeted the mind just as much as the muscles. Picture this: a young monk standing in the blistering winter cold, meditating motionless for hours. Another balancing on a single wooden pole while reciting scripture to control breathing. Others swinging heavy stone mallets not for strength alone, but to build rhythm and awareness. This wasn't just athletic training, it was a full rewiring of the nervous system, the American equivalent. Think of Navy SEALs, but pairing their brutal physical training with intense mindfulness conditioning. The goal wasn't just fight harder, it was never hesitate, never panic, and never let emotion control the body. And this psychological edge led to the creation of some of Shaolin's most iconic techniques, the iron body conditioning, where monks gradually toughened their skin, bones, and nerves until strikes felt meaningless. The stillness before movement drill, teaching them to slow the heart rate before an attack. Breathing patterns that looked like meditation, but actually controlled pain response. American fans often ask, how did Shaolin monks become so strong? The answer isn't magic. It's mindset, trained to such extremes that their physical mastery became a natural side effect. Historical anecdotes even describe Shaolin monks walking into battle with a calmness that terrified opponents. Imagine facing an enemy who isn't angry, isn't scared, and isn't distracted, just focused. That psychological dominance was often more powerful than the techniques themselves. This fusion of mental discipline and physical precision eventually became the backbone of countless martial arts systems around the world. Modern athletes train visualization, breathwork, and focus exercises because science finally caught up to something Shaolin monks knew 1500 years ago. Master the mind, and the body follows. 8. Shaolin monks turned nature into their greatest teacher. Every move had an animal behind it. One of the most surprising truths about Shaolin martial arts is that much of it didn't come from weapons or battlefield tactics, but from quietly watching the natural world. When people in the US think of animal-based martial arts, they often imagine Hollywood exaggeration, somebody roaring like a tiger or hopping like a crane. But Shaolin's approach was unbelievably scientific for its time. Instead of copying animals for style, monks studied them to understand instinct and biomechanics. A tiger doesn't hesitate before striking. A snake never wastes energy. A crane's balance comes from its center of gravity. An eagle uses precision over force. To Shaolin monks, these were not metaphors, they were blueprints for survival. In the forests surrounding the temple, young monks spent hours watching how creatures moved, fought, defended territory, and reacted to threats. They analyzed angles, momentum, reaction speed, and muscle tension long before physics became a formal science. It was trial and error at its purest form. Those wild observations eventually evolved into the famous Shaolin 5 animals: tiger, crane, snake, leopard, and dragon. Each one shaped not only combat techniques, but also mindset and breathing. Tiger emphasized raw strength, rooting, and decisive movement. Crane focused on balance and accuracy, using minimal effort for maximum control. Snake sharpened sensitivity, fluidity, and nerve-targeting strikes. Leopard trained explosive speed, short bursts of power that overwhelm opponents. Dragon strengthened internal energy, resilience, and breath control. For American viewers used to modern gyms and sports science, this is the ancient equivalent of using nature as a biomechanics laboratory. Shaolin monks didn't have textbooks or coaches. They had mountains, forests, and the patience to understand how survival works in the wild. This also shaped how monks taught beginners. Instead of starting with punches and kicks, they began with animal principles, teaching students to think like a creature. What would a tiger do when cornered? How would a crane respond to a sudden attack? How does a snake conserve energy until the exact moment of advantage? By internalizing those instincts, monks learn to adapt in real combat the way wild animals do: fast, efficient, instinctual, and without overthinking. This naturalistic approach made Shaolin Kung Fu unique among global martial arts traditions. Other systems emphasized weaponry or battlefield strategy. Shaolin emphasized the underlying laws of movement itself. It was martial arts designed not by generals, but by observing the raw logic of nature. And that philosophy shaped the temple's training culture for centuries: strength from tiger, awareness from crane, precision from snake, reaction from leopard, resilience from dragon, a complete system built from the world outside their walls. 7. The daily training routine at Shaolin Temple was so extreme it would break most modern athletes. If you imagine Shaolin training as long meditation sessions and gentle forms under a waterfall, the reality is far more intense. Historical records and modern accounts agree. Monks followed a daily routine so demanding that even elite American athletes might struggle to handle it. A typical training day began before sunrise. Monks woke around 4 in the morning, often before the sky turned blue. The first session wasn't martial arts at all. It was meditation, designed to clear the mind and anchor the day. But this wasn't calm relaxation. It was posture training, breath control, and mental discipline that required stillness for long periods. Then came the physical endurance work. Monks ran up steep mountain paths, carrying water buckets, climbed stone steps for hundreds of repetitions, performed deep stances that stressed every muscle in the legs, and practiced explosive jumps designed to build tendon strength rather than pure muscle mass. This wasn't weightlifting. It was body conditioning at a level meant to harden the entire frame. Next came flexibility, a crucial element of Shaolin technique. Monks trained splits, backbends, and joint rotations daily, not for performance, but to prevent injury when moving at full speed with sudden drops, spins, and direction changes. Imagine a gymnast's flexibility combined with a sprinter's explosive legs and a boxer's conditioned fists. That's the physical template Shaolin aimed for. Then came forms, the heart of kung fu training. These weren't choreographed dances, but high-intensity drills that demanded stamina, precision, and memory. A single form could contain dozens of transitions and required legs burning in low stances and arms snapping like whips. Monks trained the same forms thousands of times until their bodies reacted without thought. Weapons training followed: staves, spears, straight swords, broadswords, each requiring a unique mix of strength, timing, and spatial awareness. Training wasn't just swinging a stick around. It was learning control so precise that monks could strike within inches without losing momentum. Finally came conditioning, the part most Western athletes underestimate. Monks hardened their bodies through impact training, punching sandbags filled with stones, kicking tree trunks, forearm conditioning drills, fingertip push-ups, and iron body exercises. The purpose wasn't to create pain tolerance. It was to reform the nervous system so pain didn't cripple performance. All of this happened 6 days a week, sometimes 7. It created a level of physical and mental resilience rarely seen in modern fitness routines. To outsiders, it looked punishing. To monks, it was simply the path, a process built on discipline, rhythm, and the belief that the body is only limited by the mind that controls it. Shaolin training wasn't about talent or genetics. It was about transformation. Anyone could begin as a weak child. The temple's method was designed to turn that child into something extraordinary through repetition, breathwork, mindfulness, and relentless conditioning. Americans often say practice makes perfect, but Shaolin lived by a tougher rule: practice makes identity. 6. Shaolin weapons mastery wasn't just about fighting. It was a complete science of movement, leverage, and psychology. When people in the U.S. think Shaolin weapons, they usually picture the staff, the iconic wooden pole spinning like a helicopter blade. And yes, the staff became the temple's signature tool. But what most people don't realize is why Shaolin monks became so legendary with weapons. They didn't treat them as extensions of the arm. They treated them as extensions of principles, momentum, leverage, timing, and human behavior. The staff was the perfect example. Simple, cheap, durable, and available everywhere, it forced monks to master universal mechanics rather than rely on the sharpness of a blade. With the staff, there's no easy win. You must control distance, anticipate angles, and manipulate the opponent's balance. The staff trained monks to think like strategists rather than brute force fighters. Shaolin's weapon training covered dozens of tools: spear, straight sword jian, broadsword dao, rope dart, meteor hammer, monk's spade. But each weapon taught a different lesson about physics. The spear trained precision and thrusting speed. The broadsword taught rotational power. The rope dart demanded complete control of centrifugal force. The monk's spade blended defensive maneuvering with sweeping attacks. Western athletes sometimes compare this to learning multiple sports to build overall athletic intelligence, like a football player doing wrestling to improve balance, or a boxer learning fencing footwork. But Shaolin monks took this cross-training to another level. They believed mastering many weapons sharpened the mind, forced creativity, and exposed weaknesses a single style fighter might never notice. Weapon training also shaped psychological strategy. Monks studied how opponents reacted to different shapes, movements, and sounds. A spinning staff can scare or distract. A spear pointed straight at the eyes forces hesitation. A swinging chain weapon causes panic because it's unpredictable. Shaolin monks understood fight psychology long before modern combat sciences existed. Another overlooked fact: monks didn't learn weapons to kill. In many eras, they were forbidden from taking lives. Instead, the purpose was self-defense, discipline, and understanding energy transfer. If you can redirect a 10-foot spear using timing alone, redirecting a punch becomes trivial. If you can control a rope dart flying at 60 miles per hour, controlling your own limbs becomes second nature. Monks also integrated weapon training into daily life. Carrying water buckets balanced leg stance, using farm tools mimicked weapon angles. Even sweeping the floors trained wrist rotation and footwork. Everyday chores became building blocks of combat mastery. Americans sometimes imagine martial arts training as a separate class from normal life, like going to the gym for an hour after work. At Shaolin, the line didn't exist, life was training. Every movement sharpened coordination, awareness, and sensitivity. Over time, weapons weren't just tools, they were teachers. And the monks who mastered them weren't just warriors, they became living embodiments of physics, instinct, and discipline. Number 5. The Shaolin Temple survived destruction multiple times, each time coming back stronger. One of the most astonishing truths about Shaolin's history is that the temple didn't just face one catastrophe. It survived multiple eras of destruction, political pressure, fires, purges, and near erasure, yet somehow returned each time with even greater cultural influence. The most famous destruction happened during the Qing dynasty, when the temple was attacked and burned. Many stories exist, some dramatized, some exaggerated, but the core fact remains. The Shaolin Temple was crippled, its buildings devastated, and its community scattered. Monks fled into different regions of China, some hiding among villages, others becoming wandering teachers. Instead of ending the tradition, this diaspora sparked an explosion of Shaolin influence. When monks spread across China, they carried their knowledge with them, planting the seeds of countless kung fu lineages. A similar pattern repeated throughout history. Each time political conflict, rebellion, or war threatened the temple, monks adapted. Sometimes they rebuilt the physical structures. Other times they preserved teachings orally, passing them through generations like a flame hidden from the wind. This resilience became part of Shaolin identity, not just physical toughness, but cultural endurance. Think of it the way Americans view institutions like old universities or historic churches that survive fires, wars, and social upheaval. But the difference is scale. Destroy Harvard, and it will be rebuilt with funding. Destroy a medieval clan church, and its archives live on in copies. Destroy Shaolin, and you risk wiping out centuries of oral combat science, spiritual insight, and biomechanical experimentation, knowledge that didn't exist anywhere else. And yet, Shaolin always found a way to come back. Even in the 20th century, the temple faced near extinction again. Political turmoil, cultural suppression, and shifting social attitudes all weakened it. But once more, it adapted. Monks preserved forms through secret practice. Masters passed their knowledge to a handful of disciples. Techniques that could have vanished forever were kept alive through sheer dedication. Shaolin's revival in modern times, through films, global cultural interest, and renewed training programs, was not an accident. It was the result of centuries of survival instinct. Every time the temple burned, the tradition spread. Every time the tradition was suppressed, the teachings grew more adaptable. Shaolin was never just a building, it was a living lineage. This resilience shaped the temple's modern identity. When you watch monks perform in the US today, at festivals, exhibitions, or tour, you're not just seeing acrobatics, you're witnessing the result of 15 centuries of knowledge surviving war, exile, censorship, and reinvention. Shaolin isn't legendary because it never fell. It's legendary because it kept rising. For Shaolin medical knowledge was centuries ahead of its time. Monks healed bodies the same way they trained them. Most Americans know Shaolin from martial arts, but few realize that the temple was also a thriving center of medicine, combining herbal science, biomechanics, massage therapy, meditation, and body conditioning. Shaolin monks weren't simply fighters, they were physician-athletes who understood the human body with precision that feels almost modern. Their medical practices weren't based on superstition. They came from centuries of observing the effects of impact, strain, breathwork, fatigue, and recovery. When you have a community of monks smashing their fists into sandbags, stretching tendons to extreme limits, performing explosive movements daily, and occasionally fighting armed attackers, injuries are inevitable. That necessity turned Shaolin into a medical laboratory. The monks developed it da, a trauma medicine system designed to heal bruises, sprains, fractured bones, inflamed joints, and internal injuries. They studied how blood flows, how swelling forms, how muscles tear and repair. Their herbal formulas, many still used today, reduced inflammation, increased circulation, and accelerated recovery long before Western sports medicine existed. But their medical expertise extended further. Shaolin's breathing techniques weren't just for meditation, they were treatments. Controlled breathing could slow the heart rate, reduce stress hormones, and improve endurance. These methods resemble what modern American psychologists call somatic regulation or breath-anchored neurocalming. Monks also practiced tendon strengthening, using slow, controlled pressure to remodel connective tissue, a concept strikingly similar to today's physical therapy and mobility training. Instead of merely healing injuries, they aimed to prevent them by building resilience in the weakest parts of the body. Another fascinating element was Qigong, a mix of breath cycles, posture training, and energy regulation. To Western athletes, it looks like slow movement meditation, but for Shaolin monks, it was a powerful therapeutic tool. Qigong reduced joint stiffness, repaired spinal alignment, and improved lung capacity. Some routines even targeted organ function by coordinating breath with compression and release. Shaolin's medical understanding wasn't only physical, it integrated mental health as well. Monks believed anxiety, fear, and stress could weaken the immune system, slow recovery, and impair judgment. Their meditative rituals trained emotional stability, which modern neuroscience now links directly to reduced inflammation and faster tissue healing. Imagine a hybrid between a sports medicine clinic, a rehabilitation center, and a neuroscience lab, except built in a stone temple 1500 years ago. Shaolin monks didn't just heal injuries caused by training. They turned healing itself into a form of training. This dual identity, warriors who were also physicians, gave Shaolin martial arts a unique edge. A monk who understands how the body breaks also understands how to protect it, strengthen it, and, if necessary, disable an opponent using minimum force. Shaolin medicine and Shaolin combat weren't two separate worlds. They were halves of the same philosophy: master the body, master the mind, master the outcome. #3. Shaolin spirituality shaped every punch, kick, and stance. Fighting was never the goal, transformation was. Americans often see Kung Fu as a fighting system, but to Shaolin monks, combat was only one branch of a much larger tree. Every movement, breathing pattern, and form was built on spiritual foundations. Without that spiritual core, Shaolin martial arts would collapse into nothing more than choreography. Shaolin Buddhism taught that the mind and body are inseparable. If the mind is scattered, the body becomes weak. If the body is undisciplined, the mind becomes chaotic. Martial arts existed to harmonize the two, to create a person who is centered, aware, compassionate, and fearless. That's why monks practiced Chan Buddhism Zen. They meditated to clear distractions, sharpen awareness, and cultivate a calm presence even under extreme pressure. A monk who hesitates in fear loses the fight. A monk who panics wastes energy. A monk who loses emotional control becomes predictable. Meditation strengthened the same internal muscles that fighting required: focus, timing, patience, intuition. This spiritual framework shaped the way monks viewed combat. They never saw themselves as warriors seeking dominance. Instead, martial arts were tools for understanding human nature and controlling one's own impulses. A strike wasn't an attack, it was a lesson in intention. A block wasn't defense, it was alignment between thought and action. This attitude created a psychological strength that intimidated opponents. Historical accounts describe Shaolin monks entering conflict without anger or excitement, moving with the calmness of someone performing a ritual rather than a fight. They didn't fight to win, they fought to maintain principle, balance, clarity, compassion, discipline. Even the design of forms reflected spiritual ideas. Many routines expressed Buddhist teachings through motion, cycles of expansion and contraction, softness transitioning to hardness, chaos returning to stillness. These weren't symbolic metaphors, they were physical embodiments of inner philosophy. American martial arts students often separate physical training from mental training. Shaolin saw this as impossible. If you train only the body, you become reckless. If you train only the mind, you become fragile. The temple insisted on cultivating both until they moved as one. This philosophy also shaped Shaolin's most famous paradox: monks trained for war, yet lived for peace. They became some of the world's strongest fighters, but believed deeply in nonviolence. Strength was never meant to dominate others, it was meant to conquer the self. Spirituality wasn't an addition to Shaolin practice, it was the blueprint. The punches, the stances, the animal styles, the weapons, the forms, all existed to sharpen the spirit. #2. Shaolin monks achieved physical feats so extreme that modern scientists still struggle to explain them. When Americans think of superhuman abilities, they often imagine comic book heroes or Hollywood stunt teams. But Shaolin monks routinely performed feats that blurred the line between biology and impossibility, not as entertainment, but as the result of disciplined training layered over centuries. Some monks could break stone slabs with their fingers, not by brute force, but by concentrating power through tendon strength, precision, and internal alignment. Others could bend spears against their throats without puncture wounds because of breath control techniques that expanded the neck muscles and redistributed pressure. Many demonstrated iron body skills, absorbing strikes, smashing bricks over their arms, or letting heavy objects break over their backs. But the most astonishing feats were the ones involving balance, agility, and pain control. Monks trained their nervous systems to reduce panic responses so dramatically that they could lie on beds of spiked blades, balance on spear tips, or hang upside down from high beams using only leg tension. These weren't parlor tricks, they were neurological adaptations built from tens of thousands of repetitions. The American equivalent would be elite gymnasts or parkour athletes, but even that comparison falls short. Shaolin monks didn't perform feats for medals or applause. They did them to test discipline over fear, attention, and the limits of the body. Their training turned human physiology into something flexible, adaptable, and shockingly resilient. Their elite abilities didn't come from magic or hidden powers. They came from methods that modern sports scientists now validate: fascia conditioning, breath regulation, interval stress training, and somatic focus. What monks discovered through centuries of experimentation parallels findings in neuroscience today: the idea that the brain, nerves, and connective tissues can be conditioned far beyond what most people imagine. This is why Shaolin performances in the United States continue to astonish modern audiences. They're not flashy theatrics. They're demonstrations of what the human body becomes when discipline meets ancient biomechanics. Each feat is a message. You don't know your limits until you test them. 1. Shaolin's influence on global martial arts is so massive that modern combat sports wouldn't look the same without it. Shaolin Temple isn't just a birthplace of Kung Fu. It's the foundation of a global martial arts identity. Many Americans know that karate, Kung Fu, and modern wushu share Asian roots, but few realize how many systems across Asia and even parts of the West trace their core principles back to Shaolin. Through centuries of war, migration, and cultural exchange, monks carried Shaolin knowledge to new regions. Some settled in southern China, influencing Wing Chun, Hung Gar, Choi Li Fu, and countless regional systems. Others traveled to Japan and helped shape early forms of Japanese combat philosophy. Even in Southeast Asia, echoes of Shaolin footwork, breathing techniques, and animal-style principles seeped into local fighting cultures. By the 19th and 20th centuries, Shaolin ideas reached the United States through immigrants, performers, and martial arts teachers, eventually influencing Hollywood, action choreography, and even modern self-defense training. The idea of combining physical technique with mental discipline, now common in American martial arts schools, comes from Shaolin's blend of Chan Buddhism and kinetic science. Shaolin also shaped cinematic martial arts, which changed global pop culture. Without Shaolin's legacy, Bruce Lee's movement philosophy wouldn't exist in its modern form. Jackie Chan's stunt style, a mix of acrobatics, weapons, and comedic timing, grew directly from opera traditions inspired by Shaolin techniques. Even Jet Li's global career began with Wushu, a system that evolved from Shaolin's structured forms.